we have discovered and built as a civilization will be lost.
For all of these is that they have inherited a shared idea and are manifesting that idea in different periods of history, in different cultures, in slightly different ways. But the idea is what is ancient.
It seems like a lot of people are waking up to that idea.
Definitely.
Do you have hope in the younger generation?
Is it possible that some of them survived? Is there descendants of that civilization still around today?
When I said in the series that I'm public enemy number one to archaeologists, well, that actually is what I am.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast, episode 258. And today we are yet again joined by Graham Hancock. If you didn't catch our last episode, we dove into a variety of topics just now.
Yes, we did indeed.
But we're back again to talk about even more.
Yes, I'm very excited for this episode because we're going to be diving into really your forte, your specialty, and that is this question of, was there a lost advanced civilization that existed at the end of the Ice Age? And also, are we a species with amnesia? Are we missing a piece of human prehistory?
Yeah.
And this mystery has driven you for the past, 30 years or so?
Yes, it really has since the late 1980s. In fact, since about 1989, all my work was journalism before that, and my books. I did write books in that period, but they were either the 1970s and the 1980s. They were some travel books and some current affairs books, looking, for example, at the Ethiopian famine in 1984. That book was called Ethiopia, the Challenge of Hunger. Looking at the corruption in the international aid business. I wrote a book called Lords of Poverty. Subtitle was The Freewheeling Lifestyles, Power, Prestige, and Corruption of the Multi-Billion-Dollar Aid Business. Wow. And I was looking at foreign aid as an institution, and in those days, criticizing foreign aid was like criticizing motherhood. It was something you just weren't supposed to do. But I had seen so much going wrong with aid in my travels, particularly around Africa, and I felt somebody needed to speak out about it. It's not that I had anything against individual aid workers, but aid as an institution was not help. I found it was very unhelpful to so-called developing countries, and I felt this needed to be pointed out. But around about that same time, traveling widely and traveling in particular in Ethiopia, I came across Ethiopia's claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, and I found it a very interesting claim, since no other country in the world claims to possess that relic. And I began to look into it in depth, and that was what led me ultimately into
what up, Russ? How you doing, man? How you doing, bro?
Investigation into the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age.
Yo, what up, man? See some Aztec? Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that, man. I really do. My buddy just called me, left a message. I might call him back, but let's see.
But there were certain aspects of the of the Ark of the Covenant, as it's described in ancient texts, and as Ethiopians still talk about it today, which didn't seem to fit the context of the times. It seemed like some sort of technological device of some kind. It's very carefully described in the book of Exodus. Its dimensions are given precisely. It's a wooden box, but it's lined outside and inside with gold, with pure gold, and then supposedly the tablets of stone with the Ten Commandments are placed inside it. But it does all kinds of weird stuff. It lifts its bearers up into the air. It's carried on carrying poles by a group of bearers. Sometimes it will kill them. Sometimes a bolt of fire will flash out from it. It doesn't seem to depend on whether the person is negative or positive. There was a character called Uzzah in the Bible.
All right, I'm gonna call my buddy back while I load the vape. So I'm gonna mute the mic for like 5 minutes or so.
Lashed out from it and struck him dead, even though his intentions were perfectly good. It seemed to have a hint of technology about it, not simply, superstitions about the divine power, but something that didn't quite make sense in the context. And this led me to consider the possibility that there might be something missing in our story, that we shouldn't rule out the possibility of perhaps other kinds of technology, not necessarily our kind of technology, being developed by some civilization in the ancient past. And this was one of the reasons why I then went on to write Fingerprints of the Gods, which was published in 1995, and which is probably my best known book in this area. That's where I really went in depth into investigating the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age. And obviously, as the years have gone by, I've refined my thinking on this and learned a lot as I've gone along. And I'd like to make this clear at the outset when talking about a lost advanced civilization, is I don't mean a civilization like ours.
Like flying cars and,
and
robots and stuff.
robots and all our stuff. I don't mean that at all. I believe that all human civilizations have emerged out of shamanism. I think shamanism is the fundamental basis of human civilization, and it's the fundamental basis of knowledge. And shamanism can be very scientific in its pursuits and in its investigations. And I think that's the basement, that's the foundation of all human cultures. And some human cultures have taken that foundation and gone in one direction, and some have gone in other directions. So I'm often criticized for saying that some kind of weird advanced civilization came and taught indigenous people stuff. No, that's not what it's about. That so-called advanced civilization emerged out of shamanism itself.
Great phone call, my friend. Yo, what up, MRDS? How you doing?
Civilization. And I believe it was present all over the world. But it
was a great
began for me with
great phone call with my buddy, Big Matt Monks, Big Matt the DJ.
And about the way that the past is explained. And
we are still going to load the baby.
Amongst those issues, two in particular stand out. One is evidence of extraordinarily advanced knowledge of the cosmos and of the Earth's place in the solar system.
Reload my stuff. 1 second.
At a very
sorry, it's gonna be
just
some
about as early as
time,
you
but
could go. When you look at ancient texts like the Rig Veda in India, for example, there is evidence long before the Greeks, who are credited with being the first discoverers of a phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. There is evidence that cultures long before that, going back into the mists of time, in the oldest myths and traditions that we know, are encoded a series of numbers and a certain symbolism, which is often the symbolism of a great mill turning in the heavens. And in fact, I like to recommend books by other authors. And the book that I recommend, and the book that was key in my own journey, was written by two professors of the history of science back in the 1960s, or perhaps 69, 1970. Their names were Giorgio de Santillana, who was a professor of the history of science at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Hertha von Deschen, who was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. And it's a monumental work of research and investigation. And they demonstrated complete, at any rate to my satisfaction, nobody has ever really successfully faulted them, that there was a highly sophisticated knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes, that it's impossible to trace how far back it goes. It just goes back thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years. And they attribute it to what they call some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization that first came to understand the world in terms of number and measure. And I mean, to cut a long story short, precession is an observed phenomenon. At the moment, if you take the North Pole of the Earth, the axis of the Earth, and you extend the North Pole up into the heavens, you will find that is pointing at a particular star, pretty much. And that star is called Polaris. And that's our pole star in our time. But it hasn't always been a pole star. and it won't always be the pole star, because there's a wobble on the axis of the Earth. And therefore, that extended North Pole is actually transcribing a great circle in the heavens. Sometimes it will point at empty space, and sometimes it will point at another star. There have been a number of stars in the past that have been pole stars. Tuban in Draco was a pole star about 4,000 years ago. At the same time,
Yo, Russ,
this
man,
is
thank you
where,
for tuning in at 2:30 a.m.
it edges into what we now call astrology. There are the 12 constellations of the zodiac, and why are they recognized as such? Because they are the constellations against the background of which the sun rises, according to a very definite schedule. The greatest interest in ancient times was what constellation houses the sun on the spring equinox. What constellation is rising behind the sun? The sun is seen to be in the grip of that constellation at dawn on the spring equinox. And in our time, that is the constellation of Pisces. We live in the age of Pisces. Within a lifetime or two, it will have shifted into the constellation of Aquarius, and we do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius at dawn on the spring equinox. Before Pisces, it was Aries. Before Aries, it was Taurus. And you can go back and back and back and back and back. And whether it's to do with the pole star, or whether it's to do with the constellation that houses the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, these changes are all caused by that wobble on the axis of the Earth. It's our viewing platform from which we observe the stars. As it changes its orientation in the heavens, naturally the orientation and the rising time of particular stars will change. It's thought that the Greeks, perhaps as recently as less than 200 BC, 2,200 years ago or so, were the discoverers of precession. But what Santillana and von Deschen absolutely demonstrated is that they were simply rediscovered or redeployed, much older knowledge. Now, it takes a long time to observe this. You have to be very precise to observe this. It unfolds at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. The whole cycle takes 25,920 years to complete. And to observe it precisely and predict it accurately and know exactly what's going on, and then to create a symbol for it, a great mill turning in the heavens, and to use that symbol and to combine it with numbers that are referenced in myths and traditions all around the world, they detected the fingerprints of an ancient science in that, which had largely been forgotten, but the key elements of it were remembered through great storytelling, through myth, through traditions, and through the notion of world ages. And this is definitely the work of something that we would need to recognize as a civilization with scientific focus. And that is a civilization that can and did arise out of shamanism. Shamans are very observant of the cosmos and of what is going on in the cosmos. Second thing is the existence of ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. We know pretty well how the world looked during the last ice age. And what is the big change? The big change is that during the ice age, sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. That means that huge amounts of land that were above water during the ice age are now underwater. And therefore, it's odd to find maps which were drawn in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, but where the map makers tell us that they were using much older source maps that were falling apart, that they were trying to preserve the information in those maps, copied them onto their new maps, and lo and behold, they show the world as it looked during the last ice age. They show Antarctica in maps drawn in the 1500s, based on older source maps, when our civilization didn't even know Antarctica existed until 1820. But there it is, in all its glory, on these much more ancient maps. And then another problem, many of these maps, particularly the so-called portolanos, which are all copies of older source maps, but often incorporate new knowledge that was discovered at the time that the map makers were working, that these contain extremely accurate relative longitudes. And longitude is a scientific issue, which our civilization didn't crack until the middle of the 18th century. In fact, there was a huge prize, an unbelievable prize. I believe it was $1 million million British pounds that was offered for anybody who could crack the longitude problem. Well, longitude's really important if you're a sailor, if you're navigating at sea, because, you know, if you don't know your longitude, you might be 300 miles east or west of where you think you are.
Right.
And you might crash into a coastline that you're not expecting. It's really useful to know exactly what your longitude is. But it took a very accurate chronometer that would keep accurate time at sea despite the rolling motion of the ship before our civilization was able to solve the problem of longitude. Solve the longitude problem roughly in the 1750s onwards is when we solved it. And yet here are these ancient maps with extremely accurate relative longitudes long before we solved it, and those maps themselves are based on even older sources. So these curiosities led me to think that it's worth exploring the possibility that our historians and archaeologists don't know everything about the past, that there might be new things to learn about the past, that there might be a forgotten episode in the human story, as virtually every one of the great myths and traditions around the world insists on. And that set me on my journey to explore this possibility. That, and while I was researching the previous book, The Sign and the Seal, finding myself in the presence of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which is just the most unbelievable, staggering, extraordinary work of beauty and art and science. The Great Pyramid is an incredibly complicated monument, but those who built it had an enormous knowledge, which they manifested in the Great Pyramid, and I'll tell you a bit more about that.
Yeah, God. So for those that don't understand, what is mainstream academia's view on those maps you just referenced? Like, why don't they see the same thing that you do?
They think it's just fantasies of the map makers.
They're just like having fun, take a best crack at what it looks like.
Just make stuff up. You know, make up Antarctica.
Yeah.
Just make it up.
Why? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, they say that those map makers had the idea that the Earth somehow needed to be balanced.
Oh, so there's got to be land at the bottom, land at the top.
Yeah, and in fact, even though there actually isn't much land around the North Pole, it's mostly sea ice.
Yeah.
Whereas Antarctica is a true continent.
Huge continent.
Yeah, which is buried under ice. So you know, I mean, they're welcome to their view, but I don't agree with it. I think we're looking at hints and clues that something is missing in our story, and I made it my focus for many years to try and identify what that missing thing could be, and to try to show that archaeology, most archaeologists would deny this, and I know lots of individual archaeologists who I like very much, but again, as was the case with my book critiquing foreign aid, I'm looking at archaeology as an institution which has a particular narrative to tell. Whether they like it or not, the narrative of the institution of archaeology is that archaeology is the sole arbiter and the sole voice that has a right to speak authoritatively about our past, and that we should basically accept everything that archaeologists say. This is why some archaeologists were so annoyed with me about my Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I wasn't repeating their narrative.
Yeah.
I was telling a different story and saying, look into different possibilities. I couldn't do anything that I do without the work that archaeologists have done. And I want to pay tribute to archaeologists for that. They do a lot of hard, gritty work. Very, very important work. But like any profession, any science that gets committed to a particular paradigm, it's very difficult to see outside the boundaries of that paradigm. So I was astonished, even though I kind of expected it. I was astonished when the Society for American Archaeologists, egged on by a couple of very furious archaeologists, one of whom has been stalking my work for 30 years. I was surprised when the Society for American Archaeologists wrote an open letter to Netflix demanding that my documentary series be reclassified as science fiction, and saying that archaeology already knew for an absolute fact that there was no possibility of a lost civilization during the Ice Age. And I don't understand how they could know that. I don't get it. It's actually a lie. They don't know it for an absolute fact. It's important to realize a number of things about archaeology. A lot of archaeology that gets done doesn't get done because of a targeted search for something specific. It may be, particularly in the industrialized technological societies, it may be because a dam is being built or a new highway is being built. And rightly and properly, before that land is overturned and destroyed to create the new dam or the new highway, they want to find out if there's anything of archaeological interest in there. So they'll call in archaeologists, and archaeologists will check the landscape out and look and do some digging. And if they find anything of archaeological interest, they will report it and publish it in peer-reviewed journals and so on and so forth. But that leaves huge areas of even the industrialized technological societies which have never been studied by archaeologists at all, never looked at for a moment, because there's not been the funding or the reason to look there. They haven't had justification in their minds to spend scarce funds on looking there. The other thing is that there are large, very large areas of the world that archaeology has barely looked at all. I'm not saying that no archaeology has been done in these areas, but the Sahara Desert, for example, is largely underserved by archaeology. It's not that no archaeology has been done, but minimal, very minimal archaeology has been done in an area that covers 9 million square kilometers. Okay, and we know for sure from paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, that the Sahara Desert went through a number of phases of being green and fertile during the Ice Age. As a matter of fact, some of those ancient maps that I've talked about show a green and fertile Sahara. And they show river channels running through it where we now know that river channels did run through the Sahara. So it was an area at one time, particularly during the Ice Age, when the northern hemisphere was extremely unpleasant in many ways, and frozen and dry and inhospitable, it would be natural to migrate to warmer areas, especially if they were fertile. And the Sahara Desert, several episodes during and after the Ice Age, was a very fertile place. So it seems to me quite a serious omission to say that we know everything, we know so much that we can absolutely rule out the possibility of a lost civilization of the Ice Age, but, we haven't looked very much at the Sahara Desert. Likewise, the Amazon rainforest. Again, largely for economic reasons, this is an area that has been underserved by archaeology. There's been very little study of the Amazon. Not none, important to make that point, but not much. And you have 5 million plus square kilometers of the Amazon rainforest, still covered by dense canopy, which has hardly seen any archaeological attention at all. And yet, the latest investigations in the Amazon, and I'm as I mentioned, I have nothing against individual archaeologists. There's some great archaeologists who are beginning to dip their toes in the water of doing the real research in the Amazon. And I'm in touch with a team who are doing LiDAR work in the Amazon, where they use light aircraft to send beams of light down through the canopy, and they can see what's lying underneath the canopy. And they're finding these giant geometrical earthworks in the Amazon, and evidence of very large populations that once lived in the Amazon before the horrendous catastrophe of the Spanish conquest of South America and of Mexico. The Spanish sent ahead of them terrible diseases like smallpox, and those populations which did exist in the Amazon supported millions of people. Those populations were decimated, destroyed by smallpox, and within 100 years their cities were overgrown by rainforest, and it's over now, only now, that they're being rediscovered. So how can archaeology say, we know enough about the past to be absolutely certain that there was no lost civilization, when they haven't really studied the Sahara Desert, and they haven't really studied the Amazon rainforest? And then, in addition to that, huge issue is that sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. That 400-foot sea level, it didn't happen overnight. It was spread out over thousands of years, but there were episodes of very rapid sea level rise, very sudden and rapid sea level rise, which are mysterious in themselves. The bottom line is that 27 million square kilometers of land, and that was the best land on Earth, that was above water, is underwater.
Damn it.
Yes, there is submarine archaeology. Yes, archaeologists are beginning to consider the possibility that it's worth looking at the flooded continental shelf. Some preliminary work has been done, but most marine archaeology has been about shipwrecks from the medieval period. They're looking for shipwrecks because they don't believe that there's anything really that's going to change their view of the past. So their preconception of what might be found has governed what they actually do. And again, of course, financial reasons. It's very expensive to explore underwater. So there we have 9 million square kilometers in the Sahara Desert, 5 million plus square kilometers still left in the Amazon. It was bigger, 7 plus million square kilometers. And 27 million square kilometers of the flooded continental shelves. And then we have the fact that the archaeology that has been done elsewhere has largely been in response to roads and dams and other big construction projects and not targeted searches. So they simply cannot say that they have enough evidence to rule out the possibility of a lost civilization. And to say that is, just call a thing what it is. It's a lie. It's not true.
Life is expensive, and these days it's so easy to get yourself into debt. And once you're in debt, it's always a pain to get out of debt. So how many of you out there wish there was a better solution to paying off your debt? Well, PDS Debt has customized 0% interest options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. With rising interest rates and the cost of living at an all-time high, now's the time to finally take initiative with your debt. Stop waiting and start saving with your own custom debt savings options from PDS Debt. PDS Debt is giving our qualified listeners a free debt savings analysis just for completing a 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/mh. You'll receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. For me personally, when I got out of college, I was dealing with tons of credit card debt, and I was just making minimum payments just to pay that interest, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I actually used a program much like PDS Debt to roll all my payments into a low interest monthly payment, and I was able to get out of debt completely in a matter of a year or so. And that's exactly what PDS Debt offers. They offer a program to help you get all of your debt and balances down in a much, much more feasible way. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low 0% interest payment, and everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted, which is always great to hear. Save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time like I did. PDS Debt is offering free debt analysis to our listeners just for completing the quick and easy debt assessment. Again, at www.pdsdebt.com/mh. That's pdsdebt.com/mh. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/mh.
132.
Can we go back a little bit to the rainforest?
Yeah.
I really think it would be
I'll be
so
honest, I'm
interesting
playing
to
for
our audience to hear a
132.
little bit more about the possibility that there were these giant cities in the Amazon.
It's the only way,
that
man.
They were as big as London, multiple of them.
Absolutely.
And how they kept all of these people fed was through
I'm
this
gonna do-
soil called terra.
Terra
No, I'm gonna
Yeah.
keep it like
I
this.
found that
Black Earth.
fascinating. Can you explain
Yeah,
that?
man.
One of the problems
132, my dude.
hosting large populations in the rainforest.
We're going for
is
the
that-
10
is that
second skip.
rainforests are actually, despite their exuberance, are not particularly fertile soils. The fertility of the soil is caused by the fall of leaves and the decaying of vegetation. But if you remove the trees within a relatively short time, the soil will become infertile. Terra preta, sometimes known as the Black Earth, is a man-made soil. Human beings invented it, and the earliest so far found. But remember,
the only
so
way,
little
man.
study has been done in the
So we don't
Yeah.
even know for sure.
Say again?
We don't know for sure that if this hasn't been around previously.
We don't know, but what we do know is it's been around at least 9,000 years. I believe it's been around a lot longer than that. People found a way to make the Amazon productive for human beings in two ways. First of all, by inventing this soil, which is still sought after today by anybody seeking to settle and create agriculture in the Amazon. They can find patches of terra preta. They're going to be able to grow anything they need to grow. It's self-replicating soil. It's full of bacteria and organisms that create its fertility. It's quite a miracle.
Does that sound better?
That is the scientific
Can you hear the podcast?
and it's at least 9.
Or does that sound worse?
And goodness knows what else remains to be discovered there. So that's the first point. The second point is that, and a lot of people don't realize, is that the Amazon itself is a man-made ecosystem. It is designed to serve the interests of human beings. If you look at what are called the hyperdominant trees, they're all trees that produce food that are needed by human beings. And other trees that are not used for food are much less present in the Amazon. So the whole thing was created to serve humanity. And human beings who lived in harmony with their ecosystem up until the time of the Spanish conquest. Again, this is a science, like all sciences everywhere, that ultimately, if you trace it back far enough, you're going to find.
I turned on the
shamanism,
podcast sound again.
Shamanistic curiosity.
Anyways, I'll leave it on like this. Thanks, buddy.
And the nature of the universe.
Thanks,
we
man.
talked in the last episode about ayahuasca.
Right.
Very powerful, visionary brew. Ayahuasca is also a work of science that was the creation of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, who I think we must recognize as a civilization in every possible way.
If not advanced, I mean, it seems pretty advanced.
I think we need to recognize them as an advanced civilization. We just need to redefine what we describe as advanced.
Yeah, I think that's where people
are advanced isn't necessarily motor cars and airplanes and plastic. There's lots of ways to be advanced. And in the case of the Amazon, ayahuasca, highly effective visionary brew, is only possible. It's important for viewers to understand this, that dimethyltryptamine, DMT, probably the most powerful psychedelic known to science, is not normally orally accessible. That's why people smoke it or vape it. But what they found in the Amazon was a way to make it orally accessible. And that's because the leaves of the chacruna plant contain DMT, pure DMT. But you can't have a trip if you consume or drink a tea made from those leaves, because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase, which switches off DMT on contact. So therefore you need a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Now this is a scientific pursuit.
Right, yeah.
You need a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in the brew, which is going to shut down that enzyme in the gut and allow the DMT to be absorbed orally. And that's what they found. That's what they discovered in the Amazon. God knows how long.
Who knows how long?
Thousands and thousands of years ago for sure. Thousands of years ago. And it's an extraordinary achievement when you consider the 100,000 plus different species of plants and trees that exist in the Amazon. To do that solely by trial and error, to put together the most powerful hallucinogen known to science. I don't like that word. The most powerful psychedelic known to science. To put it together with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in, I have to admit, a foul-tasting brew, and enable visions to take place, which in Amazonian society and indigenous society are seen as valuable information. We've been taught to trivialize visionary experiences and regard them as some kind of nonsense. But all those archaeologists who think that I attack indigenous societies in some way, which I never do, I have the highest respect for indigenous cultures, they're not recognizing the science that is present in those cultures, the advanced nature of the science. The discovery of ayahuasca is an extraordinary achievement in itself, and then the realization that ayahuasca has useful teachings to bring to us, which Western science dismisses entirely, but which is fundamental to Amazonian civilization, is the second most important thing. So they create a brew, and that brew allows us to gain access to knowledge that would not otherwise be available to us. Sometimes quite practical knowledge. Shamans will use the altered state of consciousness to identify where particular game animals that they wish to hunt are congregating. They will leave their body, go up into the astral, and look down on this plane, and then they'll come back and report, that's where you need to go to hunt. So it's used for practical purposes as well as for spiritual purposes. So the question of the cities. There was a Spanish traveler Carvajal, who crossed the entire width of South America in the 1540s, some years after the conquest of Peru had begun, and a little longer after the conquest of Mexico. He didn't do it as an exploration. It wasn't his intention to explore. He was with 20 other guys, and their intention was to go hunting for a day and to bring back food for the rest of their team. They went off in a launch, a small boat on the Amazon River, and the Amazon wouldn't let them go back. It just carried them ever eastwards until after a year they finally came out in the Atlantic Ocean. They started off on the Pacific side. They came out in the Atlantic Ocean. And on the way, yes, he reported seeing huge cities, sophisticated, with advanced arts and craft.
Yo, what's up, King
highly
Nick? How
popular.
you doing, man? Hope you're doing well, dude.
Within 100 years, other Spaniards were in there exploring. They couldn't find the cities. So they said, he must have made it.
Here, we'll
And
flex
that's
for
what
King
academia
Nick. We'll flex you, my
continued to
man.
say Until the LiDAR work began to be done in the Amazon, which revealed that
For you, man.
those cities, those
Just for
huge
King Nick.
habitations, often joined by straight roadways that run for 100 kilometers or more from one section to the other, did exist. Why weren't they found 100 years after the Carvajal? They weren't
bro?
found
How you doing,
because they smallpox had utterly destroyed their population. And once those populations were gone, they weren't able to keep the rainforest at bay, and it consumed those cities. They're only being found now.
I
So there's a
apologize for
whole
not
hidden
having
history
flexed previously
of
when you had
humanity
requested.
awaiting us in the Amazon. I'm very glad that some teams of archaeologists are now beginning to do really exciting work in the Amazon, and I'm closely in contact with those teams, and I think that we're going to get a whole new vision of the past of humanity.
I appreciate your interest
Well, and just the fact
In
that
me-
there's still uncontacted tribes
and
there
me
They're
being
still
able to
uncontacted
flex
tribes,
my muscles.
that are living.
That's absolutely right.
Thanks,
the Amazon,
man. I really
the Amazon
appreciate
is
it,
the
dude.
last preserve
It's nice of you, man.
that has not really
So
been
honored.
completely corrupted by Western industrial civilization. You know, they don't want our stuff.
No.
They don't
It's
want
good to
anything
flex
do with it.
too.
They know.
From time, like
I-
from
I-
time to
I-
time,
I
it's,
talk
it's
to
good.
shamans and they see the doom of mankind in the behavior of Western technological
Get the
civilization.
blood flowing in the
When I
muscles.
say Western, I'm including Russia and China as well. These are all technological, following the technological model where tech is the answer to everything. You know, and it's all about production and consumption, and no connection to spirit. They see that as the slippery slope that will lead us on the road to ruin. And so you know we have much to learn from Amazonian civilization and from the lost past of humanity that is hidden in the Amazon and that is only now beginning to be revealed. Or already one phenomenon are these huge geometrical enclosures that are being found in the Amazon. They're earthworks. Now, I don't know if you've been to England or not, but
We have.
in England we have famously Stonehenge.
Yeah.
And we have a number of other henges. Avebury Henge is a particularly beautiful one. Actually, the word henge means it means an earthwork. When stone circles are erected inside it, it becomes something a bit more complicated. It's got the big megaliths inside it, and there are those in some of the Amazon cases as well. But those huge geometrical earthworks are almost indistinguishable from the henges that you find in Europe and particularly in Britain. Now, I am not saying that people from Britain, thousands of years ago, brought the
What
Amazon
the fuck
Right.
and
off?
taught them how to build henges. And I'm not saying that people from the Amazon went to Britain and taught the Brits how to build henges either. I'm saying that both seem to have been in receipt of a common idea handed down from, to quote Santillana and Bondesha, some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization of remote antiquity. Therefore, it's fascinating to see these enclosures in the Amazon, these earthworks on a very large scale. One of them, called Tequinho, is clearly a geometrical exercise on a huge scale to square the circle, something that geometers have long been interested in. You have a circular earthwork surrounded by a square earthwork that touches it at 4 points around the circle. You have enormous enclosures that are perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. That tells you that astronomers worked in the creation of those enclosures. And in some cases, they go back very far. And those found thus far go back at least as far as 3,000, maybe more than 3,000 years ago. But I want to know what else is going to be found in that 5 million square kilometers that hasn't been investigated yet at all. We're just touching the edge of a huge mystery in the Amazon. And interestingly, the geometrical enclosures that have been identified thus far particularly in the state of Acre in Brazil, contain in their design some connections to ayahuasca visions, which are also full of geometry, and to a particular notion of the Tucano people of the entrance to the other world, which is a geometrical enclosure, and which looks just like some of these enclosures that are on the ground today. So we're seeing science in the form of the creation of these huge geometrical, perfectly oriented structures, and we're seeing it connected to spirituality as well.
So this is why you say it's the origins are shamanistic, like.
I believe the origins of all civilization are shamanistic, and once that origin is there, then it's up to different cultures to choose which route they take, which way they go. I think that we are dealing with a lost civilization that was shamanistic in its basis, and that pursued a route that was capable of doing all the accurate, detailed measurement over hundreds of years to work out precession of the equinoxes and work out what was causing it, and to regard that information as so important that they encoded it in incredible stories and traditions that were then passed down through the generations. Those number systems keep on cropping up again and again and again and again. The key number is 72. That's 1 degree of precession. That's hold your finger up to the horizon, and 1 degree of precession is the width of your finger against the horizon. Hard to observe in one lifetime. You need multiple lifetimes. You need people watching and keeping records for long periods of time in order to get this nailed and understand what is happening there.
So that's why you don't, because like your critics will say, well, all these civilizations all did it on their own.
Yeah.
That they, this idea that there was this older advanced civilization that taught everybody how to do stuff is absolutely ridiculous. They did it all on their own.
That's what my critics.
Yeah, and so
they think that I'm trying to steal the achievements of indigenous society and hand them over to some sort of civilization like ours.
Right.
No, that's not what I'm doing. That's a misrepresentation of my position, and anybody who actually reads my books, or watches the series will see that is not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm doing. I think we're looking at a civilization that emerged out of shamanism and took a particular route, and of course it was an indigenous civilization in its own time and its own place. But what they don't like is the notion that certain knowledge and information accumulated by that culture was passed down all around the world.
That was my fault.
So that you find the same essential ideas in Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, in the Amazon rainforests, in Mexico, in Guatemala, amongst the Mayan culture, for example. The same essential ideas are being repeated. The same story of a great flood, which brought a former age of the world to an end. The same story of survivors of that flood who went around the world trying to reincarnate or give rebirth to what they had created and shared their knowledge with other peoples around the world. This is truly a pan-American myth. It's found right across the Americas, and archaeologists are now trying to claim that myth was entirely made up by Spaniards. But it's complete rubbish. It long predated the Spaniards. And it's found in many, many countries, in Central America, South America, and in North America. And it's an indigenous tradition that has been passed down through the ages, that there was a cataclysm.
It's not just coincidence, Graham. Right?
I don't believe it's coincidence.
Yeah.
I believe that it's worth considering the possibility of a remote common ancestor, which passed down key information that was inherited by later cultures and then used in various ways. An example that's really worth giving is the Great Pyramid itself, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Which we don't know how old it is. Like
I'm willing to accept that the Great Pyramid, in the form that was largely completed by the ancient Egyptians. Remember that in dynastic time, in other words, between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago, roughly 4,500 years ago. But remember that the ancient Egyptians tell us in many of their texts that everything they knew was a legacy. It was all an inheritance of the gods, and I don't construe the gods as aliens. It was a legacy of the gods, and they speak of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, which followed a cataclysmic episode, when the gods brought this knowledge to Egypt and passed it down. Now, in the case of the Great Pyramid and the whole Giza Plateau, I think if we were to, this is my view, and it's based on a great deal of research which is entirely dismissed by archaeologists. Whenever they dismiss
Yo,
their
what's
work,
up?
they don't really get to grips with the work.
What's up?
They just-
Yo, what's
It's just a
up?
narrative they don't want to hear.
Yeah, yo.
Right.
Hey,
so
Tony.
they dismiss it. But if I were
Hey.
to
No,
try
call
to
him there
envisage the
line.
Giza Plateau,
Hey,
12,500 years ago,
What's
I
up?
think what we
What's
see
up?
is an enormous
What's up?
rock-hewn statue of a lion facing
What's
due east,
up?
perfectly due east, where the sun rises on the spring equinox. Sun rises perfectly due east in the northern hemisphere on the 21st. If you go to the
That may
summer
have been,
solstice,
that
it's
was
rising
up, may have
far
been
to
the
the
peak
north.
of
You go to the
Western
winter solstice,
civilization
it's
as we
rising
know
far
it.
to the south of the east. But on the spring equinox, it's perfectly
was
due east. So
pre-
there's this huge lion statue with a massive leonine head.
was like
and
1999.
a lion's mane.
That
And
was
it's been
pre-
created by carving it out of the bedrock and creating a
software
trench
bubble,
around.
whatever.
And it
Millennium
faces
bubble,
the
whatever it
rising
is.
sun
Tech.
at dawn on the
failure.
spring equinox, as it still does
Pre
today.
9/11.
But 12,500 years ago, the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox was housed by the constellation of Leo, the constellation that we recognize and many cultures have recognized as
Diving
lion.
headbutt the Dudley
So,
Boys.
As above, so below. This
Yo, what up,
lion
Ranger? How
monument,
you doing, man?
gazing at its celestial counterpart, rising behind the
The
sun
Dudley
at dawn
Boys.
on the spring equinox. I believe
Oh
that
my
the megalithic
god, with the
temples
4x4?
that we see in front of the Great Sphinx, the so-called Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple, these are colossal.
Might be a 4x4.
Were also there at that time, around 12,500 years ago.
Gang, yo, what up?
And what happened was that in later times, the ancient Egyptians, who were the inheritors of the culture that originally
Not the car, I mean the piece of wood.
that the ancient
That they would
Egyptians
come
found
and
it necessary to restore
And
and
beat
modify
wrestlers
some
up
very
with.
ancient monuments. So that's why on the Bali Temple, which is in front of, but a little to the south of the Great Sphinx, that's why on the Bali Temple, we see that it's created in two stages. The first stage is the core limestone blocks, and they are massive, hundreds of tons in some cases, certainly up to 200 tons in the case of some of these megalithic temples on the Giza
Someone Ranger,
Plateau.
thanks for being here, man.
But the limestone is heavily eroded. And then in dynastic times, they took the trouble to bring granite to the Giza Plateau, and then to cut that granite so that it fitted the existing erosion patterns on the much older limestone blocks, and fit it onto them there. That shows two things. It shows, first of all, that they respected the limestone blocks, and secondly, it shows that the granite facing is younger than the limestone blocks itself. And there is nothing, not a single inscription in those temples which says this was built by Pharaoh such and such and such and such.
Yeah.
And I think that where the
Smoke
three
some
great
drugs,
pyramids
nice.
stand, the pyramids that are now
Should vape, my
pyramids
man.
of Khufu, Khafre, and
Vaporize.
I think what stood there at that time were low platforms, megalithic platforms. In the case of the Great Pyramid, they didn't need to do much because the Great
Oh,
Pyramid
dude, that
itself is
reminds
built
me.
around
We still have to
natural
watch
buildings.
all the
And
what's it
deep
called?
underneath it,
Strain
100 feet
Hunters.
vertically beneath the
We
base
gotta
of the
do
Great Pyramid
Trinidad.
is a chamber.
We got
Subterranean
St.
chamber,
Lucia
hewn out of solid
and
bedrock.
St. Vincent.
I think that was the original sacred site. On the
We
Giza
got
Plateau.
South Africa.
And-
We got
and the Great
we
Pyramid,
got a lot of
originally a platform. Was
yeah.
completed in the
Fuckcombustion.com.
time of the ancient Egyptians, using knowledge that was passed down from that much more ancient time. Now, why it operated in two phases like this? You know, in ancient cultures that took the heavens seriously and that understood the notion of world ages, 12,500 years ago was a very dramatic time on our planet. This was the 12,800 years ago was the onset of the Younger Dryas, which is a catastrophic climate episode, which is where the Earth has been emerging quite slowly and almost pleasantly from the Ice Age, and then suddenly goes back into a dramatic deep freeze. And weirdly, at the same time, there's an almost instant sea level rise recorded, for example, in
So the guy turns into friggin' Metroid. Did you see that?
Beneath the surface of the sea. And that's odd
Samus.
because this is a time when
Turn
the
into
world's climate has
Samus.
suddenly gone very cold. It was warming up, and then it goes as cold as it was at the peak of the last ice age. You wouldn't expect to see sea level rise happening. But the work of Cesare Emiliani has proved that sea level rise did occur. Then you have about 1,200 years of true horror on this planet. That's the time that all the great megafauna of the Ice Age go extinct. We're all familiar with the saber-toothed tigers, the woolly rhinos, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant sloths. They were everywhere there, but they all went extinct during the end of ice. So clearly, this was a very
My friend Matt Monks, Big Matty,
huge numbers,
who we DJ together,
that were very successful.
he
There's
called me and
evidence
didn't.
of a collapse in human population.
I couldn't. I didn't. I missed the call, and
I believe that's the time.
so he sang on the
where
voice
we lost
message,
track
"Happy
of an
birthday" to
episode
me.
in our story, where we lost track of an earlier
So I saved that message. It was a pretty great message.
that not our civilization,
pretty funny.
not like us. We should never look for ourselves.
Yeah.
but
Hearing
a
a fucking
civilization
grown
that's
man
capable of exploring,
singing "Happy Birthday" to a
navigating the
machine,
earth, that understood the dimensions
just
of
not even knowing if
and-
it's
and
ever
that
even
understood
going to
how
be
the
heard
earth
or
looked and was then
appreciated.
capable of creating accurate maps.
Well,
and
Matthew,
accurate
it
models.
has, and it is.
Incorporated into the Great
I
Pyramid
call him back.
are the dimensions of our planet. Again, yes, Egyptologists know that this is the
What
case,
is
but
this?
they regard it as a coincidence. It just happened by accident.
Yeah.
But it's a point that I like to bring home. And this is that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, measure that, and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. So the key dimensions of our planet are encoded on a scale of 1 to 43,200 in the Great Pyramid. And to tell us that it's speaking to the Earth, it's also almost perfectly aligned to true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. I mean, that is a tiny, tiny error on a monument that weighs
Yeah.
6 million tons and has a footprint.
I'm
of
thinking,
nearly
is there one that's there's harder
so
levels
it's
than
speaking to the
this
Earth,
though? There
and
are
it encodes the dimensions of the Earth. But archaeologists
I
say,
think.
what's so special about 43,200?
train,
It's just
silo,
random. But no, I'm sorry, it's not random. It's 600 times
jungle
72.
maybe.
It's one of those numbers generated by the precession of the equinox.
Caverns.
43,200 is a number that occurs in many ancient texts and traditions. Or
Probably bunker one
432,000.
facility. Anything
Multiples
that's not like
of the
maxed
same- of the
out
same
in
number
theory.
keep on coming up again and again.
I guess this
and
one isn't
again.
maxed out,
That
but like
is a number system that is generated
there's harder
by the
levels,
key
I really
motion
do.
of the Earth itself. So, how clever can you get?
Yeah.
You have a
one's
gigantic
pretty short.
monument which nobody understands how anybody could build it in the first
Right.
place. You almost perfectly align it to true north. You then encode the dimensions of the Earth in that monument, and the scale you used is the scale defined by a key motion of the Earth itself. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
This cannot be an
It
accident.
seems so obvious.
We're looking
I went
at
for the home run.
we're looking
I
we're
failed.
looking at an ancient lost science,
I had to
But
try.
the
I had the
ancient
full health. I
Egyptians
wanted to
were
see if I can get natural stuck,
as
but
they themselves loudly
I forgot. I
frequently
needed to shoot 6
proclaim.
bullets there
It's just
because
that
I'm so used
archaeologists
to
don't
shooting
want
the
to
3.
say it.
Whatever.
interesting with
I just
the
gotta go
king lists in ancient
full
Egypt.
retard in,
There are
or
king
not
lists
retard, but
all
like
over
full
the temples. For example, the temple of Set,
intensity
the
into
lists of king. And actually, Egyptologists use
strat.
those king lists in formulating their chronology of ancient Egypt. And they're fine with the king list as long as they go back only to the first dynasty. But the problem is the king lists go back further.
I
They go
have
back
to.
more than
the only
30,000
way.
years into the past. Those archaeologists ignore and dismiss as myth and fantasy. And again, they claim they're the ones with respect for indigenous cultures. They're not respecting the indigenous culture of ancient Egypt with the knowledge that it manifested. They said our kings were not confined to the first dynasty onwards. There were rulers who went back thousands and tens of thousands of years before that. We should listen carefully to all of these things.
I think that's what's so frustrating about it too, is that they come from this place of we're just trying to respect
like silo.
these ancient cultures, but they're really dismissing
They're
them.
very dismissive.
Especially to
And
say
train.
that all of this is just coincidence.
Yeah, yeah.
In
know,
theory.
I mean, you
Clearly
ask
it's
one
probably
of
the
these
two
mainstream archaeologists. They say they respect indigenous
Top
culture.
levels.
Ask them if they respect
Based on
shamanistic
my
views about
lack
the
of
other world,
comprehensive
about the
knowledge of
world
the
we
game.
enter in a deeply altered state of consciousness, about how we can encounter
because
the
they're not
spirits of deceased
maxed.
relatives in that world. Archaeologists say, no, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Can't be. That's just their fantasy. That's just the story they tell themselves.
Story. In
theory.
Archaeologists don't know that. That's their prejudice. They are being prejudiced against indigenous cultures in that world.
There's
And
this one.
They're subtly in their subconscious, they know they're doing it. And they're wearing their
This
guilt
one's shorter.
at the way that they put down indigenous
Okay, it's
cultures,
not
and then
shorter,
they
but
want to
I
project
think there's
it
just less
onto
to
other
do,
people.
in my
Yes,
opinion.
That's the game.
exactly right.
It seems like everything you do in the
Silo's
digital
just so
world, whether
amazing,
it's
man.
apps or
Silo
streaming
agent.
services, involves you signing up for a subscription, and it's very easy to lose track
It's
of
gonna be a
all
long
those
time before
subscriptions.
they play
And
Silo
most of the
agent
time,
again.
we sign up for subscriptions for to watch a specific show or use a specific product. But after so long, we just stop using those services, and we forget that we're paying for those subscriptions. I know for me personally, I probably am subscribed to 10 to 20 different services.
That would not be a
and I would say
fruitful
probably like half of those I don't even use anymore.
venture
And I didn't even
for
know
me.
I was still paying for most of those until I hooked myself up with Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. It's over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about, and chances are you're one of them. Like that Stars app just to watch one show, or that free gaming trial you never actually used. Rocket Money will quickly and easily find your subscriptions for you, and for any you don't want to pay for anymore, just hit cancel, which is so nice. That's like one of the biggest things I don't go and cancel them on my own, is it's just a big pain in the butt. But Rocket Money will cancel it for you. It's that easy. Rocket Money also helps you manage all of your finances in one place and automatically categorizes your expenses. So you can easily track your budget in real time and also get alerted if anything looks off. They've got credit monitoring, they monitor your credit card usage. It really is a great tool to help you get organized when it comes to your personal finances. Over 3 million people, including myself, have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/milehire. That's rocketmoney.com/milehire. Check it out today. rocketmoney.com/milehire.
Jesus Christ, stop saying Rocket Money.
I mean, it's just crazy. We've talked about alternative theories of how the pyramids were built.
Rocketbunny.com.
And those out there in that field get all up in arms about it. Or if you say it wasn't the ancient Egyptian people that built it, or didn't do it in this certain way,
Or they brought knowledge from somewhere else.
Yeah.
right,
Access something.
Yeah,
or
that
there's
gets
technology that they access.
that gets everybody very upset. The reasons that I would never seek to divorce the ancient Egyptians from the Great Pyramids are there are several reasons actually. But first and foremost, I have no doubt that the ancient Egyptians were involved in completing the Great Pyramids, and there's 4 reasons. And that is the shafts, the so-called air shafts, that cut through the body of the Great Pyramid. They're very small. They're about that wide. There are 2 of them in the so-called King's Chamber, one on the north wall, one on the south wall.
Mm-hmm.
And they always exited on the outside of the pyramid, and that was known back into the 19th century. In the 19th century, explorers could actually climb the Great Pyramid and roll a cannonball into one of those shafts, and it would end up in the King's Chamber. So
Right.
obviously, they were connected. The shafts in the so-called Queen's Chamber, and I use the word so-called because we actually don't know what these chambers were for. No burial of any pharaoh was ever found inside the Great Pyramid. The so-called Queen's Chamber, the shafts don't exit on the outside of the Great Pyramid. And nor until 1872 were they visible within the Queen's Chamber itself. They'd been closed off with facing blocks. You couldn't see that they were there. But one researcher went around tapping on the walls. He thought, there's shafts upstairs in the King's Chamber. Maybe there are here. And he found 2 hollow points, one on the north wall, one on the south wall, broke them open, and lo and behold, there were the concealed shafts. Now the thing about those shafts is that all 4 of them point at key stars, one of them being the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, in the position in the sky that they occupied around 2500 BC, not 12,500 years ago, but 4,500 years ago. And that astronomical connection to the stars at that time says to me, we cannot
Oh, I
divorce
hate this
the
stupid
ancient
fucking
Egyptians from the Great Pyramid.
agent bullshit.
But then there's a problem. The ground pattern on the 3 pyramids on the ground reflects the pattern of Orion's belt itself. And this is, of course, no accident within the ancient Egyptian system, because the constellation of Orion was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris, the civilization bringer, the entity who went around the world teaching civilization. He is that is who Osiris is, and he is seen in the sky. His image is seen in the sky as the constellation of Orion. One of those shafts points at
Guys, I love this level. This level is just so good.
Sirius, and 2 of them
It's so good.
point at the circumpolar stars.
It's so good,
At
man.
the time, when Egyptologists believed the pyramids were built. So there's definitely a connection, and I wouldn't seek
was so bad.
to break it. But
Very bad.
the problem is that the pattern of the three pyramids on the ground is the pattern of the three stars of the belt of Orion. And this has also changed subtly over the ages as a result of precession. So although the shafts in the Great Pyramid lock that monument to the epoch of 2500 BC, the
Most troll
pattern
game
of the
ever
pyramids
made, oh
on the
wow.
ground reflecting Orion's belt, effectively it's like you want to
pretty
make
troll.
a painting of Orion's belt. You paint it on an easel and then you lay it down flat in front of you. That's what you have on the Giza plateau.
I think Perfect Dark
They
might be
reflect
more
the
troll.
pattern of Orion's belt and its relationship to the Milky Way.
Perfect Dark, there's just
The
two
Great
more
Pyramids and their
animations.
relationship
They
to
just
the River Nile
do more random
reflect
ass shit.
the sky of 12,500 years ago, not 4,500 years ago.
I might be
Very
wrong,
complicated
but-
situation here. Ground pattern, speaking of what the ancient Egyptians
Perfect
called
Dark, just the
Septet the first time,
animations.
12,500 plus years ago. And the star
That's a good
shaft
question.
connecting
Who's
also
more
to the
annoying?
ancient Egyptians themselves.
Elvis
So, no
or
wonder
Natalia?
It's a difficult monument to figure out, but it's
I gotta
it's
say
both.
Elvis.
As I say, we could
Elvis is
say
a nightmare.
that the ancient Egyptians themselves
Such a
had
disaster.
sufficiently advanced knowledge of precession to be able to visualize the skies of 8,000 years previously. That would be a perfect
Presley?
reasonable thing to say. But then we're confronted with the problem of the Sphinx.
Oh, Elvis. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mentioned that lion-bodied monument. That
Yeah,
lion
I think so
monument
too,
that I
man.
believe stood there 12,500 years ago, looking at the rising sun when it was housed by the constellation of Leo.
They could have made
That lion
Elvis the
monument has been
coolest looking
subjected
alien.
to thousands of years of erosion. And I want to
They
pay
could have
tribute
made it like
to the
Predator.
brilliant work
some
of two
shit.
individuals. The late, great John
I guess
F.
Predator's
West,
not very cool.
dear
looking,
friend of
but,
mine,
like, I don't know.
the first to raise the possibility that the Great Sphinx had been
Fucking
subjected to
Frieza
some
or
kind of
Cell or
water
some
weathering,
shit.
and that
But they
creates
made
a
it look
problem in
like
itself.
shitty. Nothing wrong
4,500
being
years
small,
ago,
but
the Giza Plateau was as dry
fucking
and as waterless
more
as it is
formless,
today.
more.
And then Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University. And
I hate
kudos to
Elvis.
Robert Schoch for putting his reputation
I
as
hate
an
his
established
voice. He's the
academic
Jar Jar
on the line
Binks of.
and looking at the geology of
Nintendo.
that site and coming to the conclusion and publishing the conclusion that the Great Sphinx was subject
Elvis?
to about
I'm not gonna
1,000
say it.
years of extremely heavy rainfall. Not a flood, but precipitation, rainfall coming from above, selectively hollowing out the softer areas of rock and leaving the harder areas of rock in place. And, it's that
And Joanne's
precipitation
arms are way
that
too
you
short.
see more in the trench
Like, if you're
around
gonna
the Great
be an
Sphinx now
assassin,
than you see on the Sphinx
you gotta
itself,
like
because the Sphinx
punch
has
longer
been
or
constantly
something.
restored. This is one of the
Her,
anomalies.
her arms are way
We
too
know
short.
that some of the restoration blocks were put there in the time of the pharaoh who's
his
supposed to have been
daughter.
responsible for the Sphinx, and not a single
Sad, man. That's
document
so sad, man.
tells us that he was responsible. That's just another
Sad.
Egyptological fantasy. The erosion patterns on the Great Sphinx. Thank you to Robert Schoch for the great work he's done and the risks he took in publishing that work. Because every time you publish something out of line, you're taking a risk. But he took that risk and he published that work and he's documented it thoroughly, and he's confident that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of heavy rainfall, and that's the only time you find that heavy rainfall on the Giza Plateau is the Younger Gyges, between roughly 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. You certainly didn't find it 4,500 years ago when the Sphinx is supposed to have been made. So we're looking at a very old monument, very heavily eroded. In the time of the ancient Egyptians, they looked at that massive leonine head, which was so damaged and so eroded, almost unrecognizable, and they recarved what was left of it into the head of a human being, wearing the Nemes headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh. But that is a recarving of a much more ancient monument. That's a restoration work that was done on it, and we don't know which pharaoh it's supposed to represent. The Egyptologists like to think that it represents Kafka, but there's no compelling evidence for that whatsoever. So a lion-bodied monument, once a lion-headed monument, that now takes the form of the lion-bodied Great Sphinx with a recarved human head that's way out of proportion to the scale of the rest of the body of that 270-foot-long monument. The head is sort of tiny by comparison with the rest of the body. And the ancient Egyptians didn't get things out of proportion unless there was a very good reason to do so. And I think they were restoring a very damaged and much older lay them out here.
Is there not a hidden chamber as well under the Sphinx?
Yes. While work was allowed to be done, John Anthony West and Robert Schock were both involved in this work back in 1992. They did a seismic survey around the Sphinx, and they identified a very large geometrical chamber, about 15 feet beneath the forepaws of the Sphinx.
Wow.
20 feet beneath the forepaws. Could be a natural cavity, but the rectangular form of it suggests strongly that it
Was dug out or something.
Yeah, that it was made. And in fact, there is a whole underworld at Giza. This is beginning to be recognized, the so-called Tomb of Osiris, for example. That subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid is an example of this. I think there's a lot more remains to be discovered under the Giza.
Have they LiDAR the Giza Plateau?
Well, LiDAR in that case wouldn't help. Because there's no canopy covering it. Nothing you need to see through.
See. Yeah.
But what is needed is
Guys, I think I'm only if we're gonna get this class once.
That will show you a picture.
And if I pass away,
what is underneath the Giza.
I don't think I can do it a
And
second
whatever that's
time,
been
guys.
done,
Like, this is too
it's
much.
identified chambers, passageways, corridors, and not enough is being said about this. And I don't know what's going on. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think
You
that Egyptologists are in a conspiracy to hide the truth. I think they're just so locked into their paradigm that they can't see what's
They
there.
feel like they've got it figured out.
They've got it figured out.
No reason to waste resources.
Exactly. No reason to waste the resources, and they don't want to get mixed up in any way with this crowd of kind of quote-unquote New Age thinkers.
I'm not going to throw this run away. This run is way too fast.
So have you, because there's this idea about this chamber beneath the
Fine.
Sphinx being potentially
I don't
this
even know
hall
what
of
I'm doing.
records. And that was put forth
God
by
damn it.
Edgar Casey, I believe.
I'm just
It was,
in my
which is one of
muscle.
the
Like,
reasons that
it
Egyptologists
gets-
I'm just.
yeah.
I
distance
can't do
themselves.
old strat anymore.
Although
I
weird.
can't.
Both Mark Lehner.
But you've got a lot of knowledge around
why.
this
It's
subject.
too slow.
Edgar Casey.
Well, first of all, the fact that Edgar Casey
too
was a
slow.
healer. He used to fall into a trance-like state. And in that trance-like state, primarily what he did was offer remedies for people's ailments. But from time to time, he would start talking about Atlantis and about the lost civilization, prehistoric antiquity. And he said that the Hall of Records of Atlantis lay beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx. Well, immediately for scientifically minded Egyptologists, this is something to get as far away from as possible.
Right.
Like this nutty guy.
So they kind of neglect the fact that there are ancient Egyptian texts that speak precisely of that, precisely of the Hall of Records. I don't know. Ed Casey didn't know about those texts.
Right,
He was
that's the
tapping in from some other realm into this. But that's one of the reasons that Egyptologists have distanced themselves so much from the, from the notion that there might be something hidden. Oddly enough, both Mark Lehner, who is the leading American Egyptologist, doing work around the Great Sphinx and on the Giza Plateau, and Zahi Hawass, who's the leading Egyptian Egyptologist doing work around the Giza Plateau. Both of them were sent through college by the Edgar Casey Project.
Really?
Robert Baval and I published this in our 1996 book, The Message of the Sphinx. It was published in America as The Message of the Sphinx and in Britain as Keeper of Genesis, and we documented it. It's all there if anybody wants to check it out. Very rapidly afterwards, they distanced themselves completely from the Edgar Casey organization, but until quite recently, Zahi Hawass was still giving lectures at the Edgar Casey, while at the same time insisting that he had nothing to do with any of these so-called crazy ideas.
That's crazy.
You know,
Wow.
it's a very curious thing, and of course people have a right to change their mind.
Yeah.
So, perhaps that's all that happened. As I say, I don't see a need for conspiracy when there's already this mindset that just rules out any other possibilities. That is the mindset of institutional archaeology, not necessarily shared by all individual archaeologists, but it is the narrative they want to tell. And what I've observed, particularly in the reaction to my Netflix series, which was seen by huge numbers of people all around the world, is that what most disturbed archaeologists about it was that here was a narrative that wasn't theirs. They weren't controlling that narrative anymore. They thought they had it taped, and they were controlling the narrative in every possible way. And suddenly, reaching out to a huge audience around the world, comes somebody they didn't like anyway,
Right.
me.
They wish it was one of them. That was.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or rather, more than that, they want to remain the high priests of the past. They don't. I certainly don't want to be the high priest. All I want to do is to point out that there are certain problems in mainstream study of the past which require questioning and investigation. And the questions I've asked and the conclusion I've come to is that we are a species with amnesia, that there has been a forgotten episode in the human story, and that its fingerprints are in fact all around the world, but are not seen because it doesn't fit the prevailing mainstream narrative. Now, those archaeologists were furiously angry. I had this huge Netflix to present my ideas on, and that's why they campaigned to have Netflix, relabel the series as science fiction. That's what the archaeologists were
telling stories on.
We're having really good attempts though. Like that was really fast.
They
having really good attempts. That was full health.
But one thing that has to be remembered
or
has
one forward
iron
boost.
Death grip on the narrative of our past. The fact that I had a Netflix series and Netflix is a big platform doesn't begin to compare with the fact that the findings, the conclusion, the narrative of mainstream archaeology
Like this is fast.
informs everything that we are taught through the school and education system, right up to university, about the past. Everything we're taught about prehistory reflects the narrative of mainstream archaeology. So against that huge weight, and also most TV programs about, whether it's about ancient Egypt or other prehistoric subjects, are again informed by the institution of archaeology and reflect the narrative of archaeology. So just by dissenting from that and offering an alternative point of view, let's think about things a bit differently. Let's consider whether archaeology really does know everything it claims to know. That led to an enormous amount of fury and anger projected against me. But what it also led to was a worldwide conversation that many people who hadn't been exposed to my work were exposed to. And I want to make clear that, first of all, I couldn't do anything I do without the work that archaeologists have done, the groundwork that archaeologists have done. And secondly, I'm not alone. There are a number of other people working in this field. John Anthony West was one, Robert Schock was another, Robert Boval, huge knowledge of archaeoastronomy. John Major Jenkins dealing with the Mayan calendar. Many others, John Major Jenkins has sadly passed away. Many others are working in this field. I'm just one of a number of people who are bothered by problems in the past and are trying to find answers to that problem. And some people think that the answer is extraterrestrial visitors. I don't think that's the answer, but who knows?
Well, they have a whole show too. So
yeah, they have a whole show too. That's that's not my thing. But I think what's right and proper is to be mystified by the past and the things that aren't properly explained by the mainstream model, and I think that model needs to be challenged. And this is how, ultimately, in all of science, paradigms do eventually shift. There's a great book by Thomas Kuhn called The Structure of Scientific Revolution, which shows that actually scientific disciplines get locked in a particular mindset, and it becomes dominant. And it's regarded, they forget that it's a whole load of opinion in that mindset, resting on relatively flimsy facts. That's definitely the case in archaeology. As I indicated earlier, I mean, you can't claim to know everything about the past when you haven't thoroughly archaeologized the Sahara, the Amazon rainforest, the flooded continental shelves, and most of the work that you do in other countries is in response to a dam or a road being built. Can't claim to know about.
And just to be clear for those that maybe haven't watched Ancient Apocalypse yet, you are really, I mean, you're a journalist, you're an investigative journalist, you don't claim to be a scientist, you don't claim to be an archaeologist, and what you're really doing is you're out there gathering puzzle pieces and trying to put a puzzle together. And that's like, and then share what you're finding in the process.
Encouraging people to think.
That's what I hope to do. And I've never insisted that I'm right.
Yeah, you're like, rewrite the history, but you propose that maybe we don't have it right, but you're not saying this is the right way.
Absolutely not. I'm not insisting on anything. The only thing I'm insisting on is that there are unexplained issues in our past, which are presently not explained by the system that teaches us about them, which is archaeology. And those unexplained mysteries need to be investigated. And I've tried to investigate it. I've come to my own conclusions about them, but I don't insist that I'm right. I certainly don't insist that I'm 100% right about anything. But involved myself in an inquiry, which has now gone on for more than 30 years. I've put my life on the line again and again, not only me, but also my wife, Sandra. This is not some trivial issue for us. This is not some scheme to make money.
Right.
As a matter of fact, for many years I was completely broke, and all the research we did was done on borrowed money to the point where I was just ridiculously over borrowed. And we have put our lives at risk in the diving expeditions. For example, Santa nearly lost her life in one of those diving expeditions.
Really?
Yes, I and another one. When you're diving in strong currents, when something goes wrong with your air supply, it can be very, very dangerous and very, very difficult. And I think Santa and I did upwards of 1,000 dives all around the world, 200 of them in Japan on the extraordinary underwater structures that are found off the island of Yonaguni. We've been into high-risk zones.
I think
we've
I can't believe I played this level so much.
Put our lives on the line.
So
to try to
crazy.
research this story properly.
I mean, I don't regret it at all.
There's some shallow
I'm just
person
like,
who's just looking at stuff and coming rapidly to
amazing.
A keyboard warrior or something.
I'm not a keyboard warrior. I'm trying to foist those conclusions on the public. The conclusions that I've come to are a result of decades of dedicated work, which has exposed both me and Santa to great risk on numerous occasions. But we're willing to take that risk because we feel it's right to pursue this inquiry, and nobody else is really pursuing it. That's why we spent 7 years scuba diving, because not enough marine archaeology is looking at the submerged continental shelves. And if we can find structures that are indisputably man-made, for example, the Great Stone Circle off Akajima in the Kerama Islands in Japan, there's a depth of about 100 feet beneath the surface. There's an enormous stone circle hewn out of solid rock with multiple other structures all around it. And even the most skeptical geologist who I took there could not claim that that was a work of nature. That was made by human beings. And therefore, it was made about 12,000 years ago, judging from the depth of submergence, which turns out to be around the time that Göbekli Tepe was built in Turkey. That's why we did that work. We dived in Micronesia, we dived in the Mediterranean, we dived extensively in India. There's a tradition of a lost city called Dwarka up in the northwest of India. We dived there at the National Institute of Oceanography. And indeed, there are enormous structures underwater at Dwarka. And there's the tradition of Kumari Kanda in South India. It's the Indian Atlantis, if you like. There's a tradition that India was extended much further to the south than it does today. That the island of Sri Lanka was joined to mainland India, and that this extensive land was the host to a high civilization that had academies and studied the world, studied the universe, but it was destroyed in a great flood. Well, it turns out that that's exactly true. Sri Lanka was joined to South India during the Ice Age when sea level was 400 feet longer. The Maldive Islands were much bigger than the tiny archipelago that they are today. It makes complete sense, and we went diving in that area. My wife Santa speaks Tamil as her first language, and Tamil is the language of South India. So we were able, through Santa, to talk fluently with local fishermen and local divers off the coast of Southeast India. And at Mahabalipuram, they told us, there's a city underwater here. We said, how do you know that? And they said, well, it's actually annoying. We keep catching our nets on it. We'll cast our nets to catch fish and they'll get stuck on a structure underwater, and then we have to send down a diver to free the net. Sometimes those divers die. Wow. We'd like something done about it. And we said, would you take us to the site and show us? And eventually that's what happened. We went out there and we did multiple dives, and true enough, down to depth of 27 meters. Again, you're looking at about 11,000 years ago. They were last above water. There are enormous, indubitably man-made structures. We had some Indian archaeologists diving with us there, and they didn't dispute that. These are absolutely man-made structures. And it was those archaeologists themselves from the National Institute of Oceanography who took us to Kumpahar, where we again dived on an enormous man-made structure at about 27 meters. So if we can find this with our limited resources, taking the risks that we took, talking to local fishermen and divers, working with local archaeologists when we could, if we can find this, then what could be found if a concerted effort were made worldwide to explore the flooded continental shelves? And I think that what would be found is not only evidence of hunter-gatherer cultures, which certainly will be found there, but evidence of cultures that we would recognize as a high civilization.
Wow. So, I get, what's the right term for mainstream archaeology?
Well, archaeologists themselves say there's no such thing as mainstream archaeology.
Yeah,
there's only
they don't like
archaeology.
that, yeah.
There's only archaeology. And right there, you have the notion that no dispute will be accepted.
Right.
You know, there's this narrative.
There's no
this is archaeology.
alternative.
There's no alternative. There's only archaeology, and any alternative is pseudoscience. That's why they label me as a pseudoscientist or a pseudo-archaeologist, because that's a very lazy, very easy way to turn people off my work without really getting to grips with the work at all in any way. Just call the guy a pseudo.
Yeah.
You know, the word pseudo means false. You know, so false archaeologist. How can I be a false archaeologist? I don't claim to be an archaeologist. I don't want to be an archaeologist.
Right.
I want to be me, doing what I do, which is fundamentally a work of investigative journalism. That's what I do. But it's a very useful label to attach to an opponent, just as labeling me as a racist or a white supremacist or a misogynist. Amazingly, the Society for American Archaeologists used all of these labels in connection with my Netflix series. They said that it promotes racism, white supremacism, misogynism, and anti-Semitism.
It's absurd.
None of those issues are raised in the series at all.
No,
in any way, race is not.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, but when you understand that a propaganda war is going on, and that the objective of those archaeologists was to destroy by any means, fair or foul, an alternative narrative, then it begins to make sense. They thought if they could just apply those labels
Why
enough
would they run
times,
the other way? Like,
they would be repeated
why would
in
you?
enough sources that people would begin
So dumb,
to
man.
believe that that was the case and wouldn't feel they needed to look at that.
Yeah. Someone comes across your Netflix series or
Just
one of
so
your
dumb.
books, looks
I
you
was
up.
too
the
far
first thing they
back.
go to
I
is
had just given
Wikipedia,
up anyways after he
pseudoscientist.
ran back.
All right.
After he ran back to the right.
Exactly.
Why
I'd
bother
given
with this
up.
guy? He's a pseudoscientist.
It's such a shame.
And what they're not aware of is that precisely the same small group of angry, furious, envious archaeologists who launched the attack against my Netflix series and who've been attacking me in the case of John Hoops from the University of Kansas for more than 30 years. Precisely that same group of archaeologists.
I don't know, my friends. I might play a different
the
game,
moderators on my
honestly.
Wikipedia page.
I might play like some Mega Man or
And they will
something.
not allow anybody to edit my page.
Some Mega
They
Man
control
3
it
or
completely.
4.
So let's forget about the idea
Probably Mega
that
Man 4.
Wikipedia is a balanced
stream it,
objective
probably.
source.
Oh, absolutely not.
When it cannot be a balanced objective source if the
This
person
is
being
not fun.
described in that Wikipedia entry is being described by a group of self-declared enemies of that person.
Yep.
It can't
Makes
be.
no
And,
sense.
and I don't know about other issues than other people, but I know from my own experience of Wikipedia that Wikipedia's entries on me are dishonest. And I suspect that that's true of many of the entries in Wikipedia.
it
I
is.
think Wikipedia is a source of disinformation
It is.
rather than information, but it's the first port of call. For many people, they've heard something new, they want to find about it. If you search Graham Hancock, the first hit you'll get is Wikipedia.
It's right there.
It's right there.
iOS
and
app now,
many people
nice
are
too.
still under the mistaken illusion that Wikipedia is objective, whereas in fact it has an agenda. It certainly does on a number of issues, and my issue is one of those issues.
I think
Hell
it's
yeah,
because
bro.
people associate it with encyclopedia. They think it's just factual.
Yeah, they
don't
think it's just
understand it.
factual, and that there's no bias, and that rigorous processes are
Right.
followed in order to.
Yeah.
Insane.
What authority is this? That's running it?
And it's just not. It's purely ideological in my case. So I would ask people who've been exposed to this propaganda that's been directed against me and my
Nice,
work,
man.
actually take a look at the work
Yeah.
itself.
Make
You
your
know,
own
don't be
decision.
driven away from it. And,
Heck yeah,
and,
dude.
And in addition to the Netflix series and other television I've done, look at the books. You know, because in a television series, you can only
do
say
so much,
You can only say so much in
Right,
episodes
right.
that are half an hour long.
Yeah.
In a book,
Like a
you
what?
can devote hundreds and hundreds of pages
Right.
to an
There's
issue.
no
and
limit.
there's no limit, and you can underwrite it with footnotes that go on and give all the
Yo, what's up,
sources
Anali? How you
in
doing, man?
detail. And in the critiques of me and my work, I've noticed that the archaeologists steer away from my more recent books, because I've learned as I've gone on. When I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, I was less rigorous than I am today, because I hadn't learned the lesson yet, that everything I do is going to be exposed to very harsh criticism. And the lesson that I learned is that I need to really reinforce my argument, and I need to make sure that when I rely upon a source, that source is reliable.
We've learned that lesson too.
Sorry?
We've learned that lesson too over the years.
It's important to rely on reliable sources.
It is.
So, in more recent books like Magicians of the Gods, which was published in 2015, and America Before, which was published in 2019, I have been very, very, very careful, and indeed in Underworld, that was published in 2002, I've been very, very careful about documenting my sources and relying on sources that could not be easily dismissed. But all of this is just ignored.
I was so far away.
Actually, one of those archaeologists behind this
I was too far away.
American archaeologists attack on my Netflix series, who accused me of being racist, said, but effectively what he said was Hancock was very clever in not mentioning race in his series, but we all know he's a racist anyway.
God.
I mean, what is that?
It's
What kind of decent scholarship is that?
Yeah.
To say things like that, that despite the fact that race is not mentioned in this series at all, we are still going to accuse Hancock of this.
Of course.
I think it's just hard too, because with your series, especially if people are coming to your series, your Netflix series, and that's the first thing they see of you or hear you talk about these things. I can understand how, say there's an archaeologist never heard of you before, they watch your Netflix series and you're saying these things, and it's very easy to pick it apart, so to speak, because you're not able to include those sources, and everything's edited and
so highly produced.
Because I was watching an archaeologist, a YouTuber who's an archaeologist, and he did like a 4-part YouTube series. You might have probably seen it, but he was like just picking apart every single episode that you did. And one of the things he said is that, they cleverly edited the talks with the archaeologists to make it look like they were siding with you and things like that. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Like,
Netflix are very professional. They don't make their own shows. The shows are commissioned from independent production company. The independent production company that made my series is ITN Productions in the UK. That's Independent Television News Productions. They triple fact check every fact that was stated in that series, and Netflix absolutely insist upon that. And what was thrown against the series was spin and lies and misrepresentation. Straw man attacks. Hancock says this, Hancock does that. The series was edited in this or that or such and such a way. They're all fundamentally designed to turn people off the work and to keep rigid control of the narrative. And yeah, sure. I mean, there are some YouTubers who've taken advantage of the notoriety of the series to help to get their view counts
videos.
up, So that is going to happen, and that's why I insist. In the debate that's coming up, I will debate an archaeologist on the Joe Rogan Experience on the 24th of October.
Oh, it's going to be on Joe Rogan? Interesting.
That's happening on the 24th of October. I would have liked the archaeologist to be John Hoops from Kansas University, because he's just been so obnoxious about me.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the guts to put his money where his mouth is and actually sit down in a face-to-face debate with me.
Funny how that works.
And he invented all kind of excuses. He said, I can't debate metaphysics with archaeology. Well, no, the fact of the matter is he just doesn't have the stomach to sit down opposite me and be confronted with his lies. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'll state it plainly. The man is a coward. This is cowardice. In the case of Flint Dibble, who's taken over, he's going to debate me. He's an American archaeologist who presently teaches in the UK, and he's also been very vituperative in his critiques of me. But that's exactly what I want. I want to debate an absolutely rooted and grounded mainstream archaeologist who is teaching at a major university, and therefore who is responsible for the institution of archaeology as a whole. I don't want to debate some sort of recent teenage newbie who's doing a YouTube channel. I want the debate to be with a thoroughly respected figure within the field of archaeology, because that way the debate will be a historic moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I say and what that person says will stand for a great deal more than just our immediate encounter. It really is the first time this has ever happened.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to Flint Dibble for being willing to do this debate, and I very much look forward to it.
What's his
Me
argument
too.
against you? Like from a aerial
Oh, Hancock's work supports racism and white
view.
supremacy.
Oh, so he's on that train.
He's on that trail as
Oh,
well.
wow.
Hancock's declared war on archaeologists. Well, no, actually.
You worked
30
with
years
them.
ago, archaeology declared war on me,
Yeah.
the institution of archaeology. And I see what I'm doing as self-defense, you know. When I said in the series that I'm public enemy number one to archaeologists, well, that actually is what I am. It's worth making that clear. There's been I've not seen from Flint Dibble any detailed specific critiques of things that I've said. And there's been a lot of I'm going to reserve quite a lot of what I have to say for the debate itself, because I have chapter and verse on this, and there has been some very egregious misrepresentation of me and what I said and what was said in the series. They misrepresent it and they attack it and they say, oh, we've got this evidence that proves that was right. If you actually get into that evidence, you find it doesn't prove that what we said was wrong at all. But it sounds good, you know, if they say, oh, evidence proves that this was not the case. So I'm not going to go into the details because I want to keep my ammunition
Yes.
for the
For sure.
Understandable,
debate. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, so just to conclude on this issue of a debate, John Hoops from Kansas University, who is one of my major critics, didn't have the grit to sit down face to face and debate me on the Joe Rogan Experience. Flint Dibble has agreed to debate me on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he's also a highly credentialed archaeologist involved in ongoing digs in Greece and teaching at a major university. I don't think Flint Dibble is going to weasel out of the debate in the way that John Hoops did. I think Flint Dibble has enough character to see it through. But in the event, for one reason or another, that he does pull out of the debate, I'm prepared to debate somebody else, but that somebody else must be, I'm going to use the word mainstream, must be an established mainstream archaeologist. He must be teaching at a major university. He must have been involved in extensive archaeological digs. And he must be willing to take the risk of putting his whole career and the whole institution of archaeology on the line in front of an audience of tens of millions of people. I will not debate some wannabe who's got a YouTube channel. That is not enough. That is a waste of my time and my energy. This debate has to be at a high level, and I want archaeology to throw at me the highest level they possibly can. And right now, because most archaeologists haven't wanted to debate at all, right now that highest level is Flint Dibble. And I hope, Flint, if you're listening to this, I hope that you will be there and debate me on the Joe Rogan Experience on the 24th of October. If you can't be there, I hope you will find another colleague who is equally well qualified as you, who can respectably stand up and represent the institution of archaeology. And then we will have a worthwhile debate.
Well, if they're so confident, why wouldn't they debate you?
I know, yes, it's true. Well, yes, there's that feeling that we don't want to give Graham Hancock a platform.
Oh, I think that's a convenient excuse.
I think it's
Well, you already
convenient
have the
excuse to-
platform, so
Yeah.
they need the platform,
Yes.
honestly.
Yeah.
In this case, yeah. So this is my view. I think it's very important to have a debate about this. It's a high stakes debate. It's high stakes for me, and it's high stakes for the archaeologist who debates me. But that archaeologist must be an archaeologist with a long, detailed track record in archaeology, not some wannabe who wants to make himself famous on YouTube.
Well, those requirements that you're setting say a lot about your confidence in your work. I'm really looking forward to this debate.
Yeah, I think it's an important development, and it is the first time that that the institution of archaeology will have sat down and debated somebody who's looking at prehistory from a totally different point of view. And that in that sense, it'll be useful for the whole public conversation around this, and that's what I want it to be, and that's why I'm willing to invest my energy in it. And it's a high risk, as I say, a high risk debate for that archaeologist and a high risk debate for me too. Anybody can screw up in a debate. you know.
Yeah.
I hope
That's
I
a
don't.
true test of knowledge.
I'll do my best and to speak my truth and to speak truth to power. That's what fundamentally I'm here to do.
Challenge the official narrative, and hopefully open the minds of
how else can we grow?
I mean, it's just they act like it's all set in stone, so to speak.
We know everything.
And that's the thing. What bothers me too is that how is archaeology any different than, say, medicine or other types of sciences or astronomy even? I mean, we're constantly changing our views on astronomy and the cosmos and stuff. It's like, how's it any different?
Well, it shouldn't be, but it is. They seem to regard themselves as the sole interpreters, the sole group of people who have the right to interpret the past to the general public, the remote past. There's a difference between history and archaeology. History is largely that period for which we have written documents, and archaeology is the period before that where we don't have written documents, and we must draw our conclusions from increasingly small and limited amounts of evidence that are found on sites. I don't understand why there's this fixation that they've got it all nailed and that they completely understand everything. And they will say, of course, we're all interested in a new discovery, but they're only interested in new discoveries that support the prevailing narrative.
Right.
Any new discovery that challenges the prevailing narrative, they're going to pour all manner of scorn on it in every way that they possibly can, without getting to grips with it. I think that in this sense, let's consider another profession like piloting an aircraft. I think there's a difference between archaeologists and airline pilots. An airline pilot is specifically trained in a specific set of skills to fly an airplane, and that's what an airline pilot does. But an archaeologist is responsible, or has claimed to be responsible, for interpreting the whole human past to us. And I'm sorry, but a small group of so-called professionals cannot own and monopolize the human past in the way that airline pilots can monopolize the flying of aircraft. The human past is the property of all human beings. We all have something to contribute on that issue. And it shouldn't be monopolized by a relatively tiny group of professionals who have a much too high opinion of themselves.
Yeah, it's really such a shame that that's where we're at.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're dealing with some health issues? You're having these unexplained symptoms. You want to know what's going on, so you turn to the internet, or worse, TikTok, and you end up going down a rabbit hole getting questionable advice from random people online. Well, there are better ways to get the answers that you're looking for, and that is by seeing an actual trusted professional, a doctor, someone who knows what they're talking about, and not getting your advice from random people on the internet. And ZocDoc can help you find doctors and medical professionals that specialize in the care that you specifically need and deliver the type of experience that you want. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. And you can also find someone that treats almost every condition under the sun. No more Dr. Roulette or scouring the internet for questionable reviews. With ZocDoc, you have a trusted guide to connect you with your favorite doctor that you haven't even met yet. Millions of people use ZocDoc's free app to find and book a doctor in their neighborhood who is patient-reviewed and fits their needs and schedule just right. Now, I have found many doctors through ZocDoc myself. Even before they sponsored us, I used the service and have found so many great professionals that I truly trust and have had a good experience with, because finding the right doctor can be so hard. There are so many bad ones out there, so finding someone who listens to you, takes your issues seriously, and wants to help you is hard to find. And I feel like we look at reviews for everything nowadays, so why wouldn't you look at reviews for your doctor? So go to ZocDoc.com/milehigher and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then you can find and book a top-rated doctor today, and many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/milehigher. ZocDoc.com/milehigher.
I know we've been going for a while already. I wanted to shift things because one of the sites that was really interesting to me from Ancient Apocalypse was Bimini Road. And in that episode, of course, the buzzword comes out, Atlantis, right? And they love to attack you whenever you bring up this idea of Atlantis even possibly existing.
Yeah.
And I was watching, to prepare for this, I was kind of watching what the other side is saying, and they're like, oh, it's absolutely ridiculous. He refers to this as a road. This is the Bimini Wall, and it's a natural formation that is there. And
Seems so absurd.
when you dove on that site, and what did you find?
I've dived on that site multiple times, going back to the 1990s, I'm quite certain that it's a man-made site, and I've done the diving to draw that conclusion. I spent a lot of time underwater on the so-called Bimini Road, it is beach rock, but it's beach rock that has been shaped and molded by human beings, that has been leveled by placing blocks underneath blocks in a way that couldn't happen naturally.
Yeah, that was wild to see the blocks holding up those large. I was like,
exactly.
There's no way in nature that's happening.
Exactly. It's not as easily dismissed as they would like it to be. And the whole Atlantis issue, again, I've taken a look at the kind of attacks that have taken place around my references to Atlantis. And those attacks, they always seek to isolate Atlantis and make us think that that's just the only story that there is about a lost civilization of prehistory. Whereas, in fact, ancient cultures all around the world preserve the memory of a high civilization of prehistory. In India, it was called Kumarikanda. But if you go to Mesopotamia, you're going to find the same story of a great flood and survivors of a flood who taught knowledge around the world. You're going to find the same story in ancient Egypt. You're going to find the same story everywhere. As a matter of fact, and again, I'm going to preserve most of this for the debate, the Atlantis story is present in ancient Egypt. They just don't call it Atlantis. They use a different word for it in the ancient Egyptian language. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. But that's not surprising if we consider the pedigree of the Atlantis story. The Atlantis story, as it's come down to us, the earliest surviving reference to it is in the works of Plato,
Right.
Who is a revered figure in his own right, the Greek philosopher Plato, and in his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. And Plato draws his information from an individual who may well have been an ancestor of his, Solon, the great Greek lawmaker. Solon was famous for his codification of laws of Greece, and he was a traveler, and he made a well-documented visit to Egypt around about the year in our calendar 600 BC. Okay? And in that visit to Egypt, as Plato reports the story, as he had received it, as he reports it in these dialogues, where he puts the words into the mouths of two people who are talking, Solon was told by the priests of the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta, a temple that no longer exists. He pointed to writings on the walls, and there was a priest who spoke Greek and ancient Egyptian, and he asked that priest to tell him, what do these writings say? And the priest then repeated the story of Atlantis, and Plato put that into the Greek language as Atlantis. We don't know what the ancient Egyptians called it there, but I do know that they called it the homeland of the primeval ones from another temple. Solon then asks the priests, so this Atlantis was destroyed in an enormous flood. When did that happen? And they said, quite matter-of-factly, 9,000 years ago. So there you need to do the math. This is 600 BC that Solon is receiving that information that he transmits to Plato. 9,000 years before 600 BC is 11,623 years ago, if you wish to be precise. Let's say roughly 11,600 years ago. And this is one of the reasons why I take Plato's report seriously, because 11,600 years ago was one of those massive pulses of meltwater that coincided with the ending of the last ice age, just as the Younger Dryas began 12,800 years ago with an anomalous sea level rise, thoroughly documented in the work of Cesare Emiliani. Just as it began with a sea level rise, it also ended 11,600 years ago with a massive sea level rise, which is called Meltwater Pulse 1b. And when archaeologists try to get rid of this, they say, well, look, Meltwater Pulse 1b unfolded over a period of 600 years, so in any 1 year, if you do the average, it wasn't that much. But that's not how the meltwater pulse worked. There were years of massive rises to sea level, and again, this is documented in the death of corals. And there were years when not much happened. So averaging it out over 600 years is not the way to do it. But we have a time in relatively recent history, prehistory, 11,600 years ago, when there was an enormous global flood. And is it a coincidence that Plato named precisely that time for the submergence of Atlantis? I don't think so. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I think it's another reason why we should have respect for Plato, have respect to the tradition that was passed down to him through the line of Solon, and have respect for Meltwater Pulse 1b and its complexities over a period of about 600 years. And finally, of course, there's the fact that Göbekli Tepe, this extraordinary megalithic site in Turkey, as far as we can tell now, the work began on that site, guess when? 11,600 years ago. I can't help feeling that we're looking at a project that was initiated by survivors of that cataclysm to bring to that place skills and knowledge that had not previously existed in that place, to create a gigantic megalithic site. Indeed, partly for spiritual reasons, but also partly to mobilize the local population, to give them a big project to work on, and during that project to teach them agriculture. At the beginning, Göbekli Tepe was entirely inhabited by hunter-gatherers. 1,000 years later, they were all agriculturalists, and during those 1,000 years, the whole Göbekli Tepe was created, and then, lo and behold, once that was achieved, it was buried, deliberately buried. More work was put into burying it than was put into creating. These stone circles were filled up with piles of rubble, and then they created a rubble hill over the top of the whole thing. And that's why Göbekli Tepe is such an important site, because it then remained sealed. Nobody was trampling all over it. No later cultures were coming in and contaminating the carbon dating with introduced materials from a later time. It's a sealed site, and it's 11,600 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
And that coincides with Meltwater Pulse 1b, and that coincides with the date that Plato gives for the submergence of Atlantis. We can either choose to just say all of this is coincidence and it has no significance,
right.
or in my case, I think it's not coincidence, and I think it's really worth looking at the implications of all of this with an open mind to see where it leads.
So Atlantis is, you're not saying Atlantis is that lost advanced civilization necessarily. They may have been one of the lost civilizations.
I'm saying that there was a culture that emerged out of shamanism that developed certain skills, that was able to explore the world, and almost certainly influenced other cultures around the world.
May have assisted in these megalithic sites across the world?
May have assisted in these megalithic sites in certain ways. I think the dating of quite a number of megalithic sites needs to be reconsidered in the light of Göbekli Tepe. The notion before Göbekli Tepe was that the oldest megalithic site on Earth was about 6,000 years old. Suddenly we have this 11,600 years old megalithic site, and clearly the people who made it knew what they were doing. You don't move around 20-ton megaliths and carve, beautiful imagery into them and in high relief. You don't do that without having experience of what you're doing. You don't align them.
There's no way that's a first try.
No, there's no way that's a first try.
Yeah.
There's obviously a hidden background to that, and that background at the moment is very hard to explain. Some archaeologists say, it must have been the Natufian culture, which existed in that area for 1,000 or 2,000 years before that. But what we see from the Natufian culture is just no more dramatic than a sort of dry stone wall in Wales. I mean, it's just little things, nothing big, nothing extraordinary like this. I am yet to see the evolutionary process that could have led to Göbekli Tepe, and if it's there, I think it's going to change our entire view of history. And it's interesting that now we have Karahan Tepe, which we also filmed at in the series, and 10 other sites have now been found in that area, which all date back to that horizon around 11 or 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
And goodness knows what is going to come out of all of those excavations. I mean, first of all, Göbekli Tepe was discovered by accident. Back in the 1950s, a team of American archaeologists who were interested in Stone Age stuff from the Paleolithic, the Upper Paleolithic, found themselves at Göbekli Tepe. And then they saw the tip of a beautifully carved pillar sticking out of the side of the hill. And they said, nah, that's not Stone Age. That's way too good. That must be Byzantine. That must be from just 1,000 years ago or so. So it's not our stuff. We're not going to excavate it. Just leave it there. And there it was left until Klaus Schmidt, a great man of the German Archaeological Institute, who I knew personally, and who kindly showed me around Göbekli Tepe in 2013. He spent a lot of time with me. That's the kind of archaeologist I enjoy meeting. who doesn't typecast me. He knew who I was. But he certainly did, because we'd been in correspondence before. But you know, they don't automatically shut me out, but they're willing to talk to me, and he was willing to talk to me. And it was he who took an interest in that curious pillar sticking out of the ground, and decided, yeah, let's
My friends, I don't want to play GoldenEye anymore, man. I don't want to play this game anymore tonight. I don't.
Then Karahan Tepe. When I first went to Karahan Tepe, it was just like Göbekli Tepe had been before, just a few
I
bits
might
of pillar
sign off.
sticking out of the ground. Now it's an enormous excavated site, and as I say,
I'm thinking of
at least
playing
10
another
other
game,
sites,
but I don't know,
in that
man.
in that area of the 12 tepes.
I can't do
People
Mega
as they
Man
call
4
them,
right
12
now.
pillars.
That's just
Göbekli Tepe
too intense. That's
itself
like
means
Aztec
pot-bellied
double.
hill in the Turkish language, and that's because that's what it looked like
Yeah.
until it was excavated. That hill was entirely artificial, entirely man-made, designed to cover up this site. I can't help thinking time capsule, that there was an intention to preserve this site.
Knowing it would be uncovered later on.
Eventually,
Potentially.
but it would be covered, but uncovered, because the problem with many archaeological sites is that they have been tramped over by so many different cultures over so many different periods of time. It's really hard to date.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign
Carbon
off.
dating only dates organic materials. Doesn't
Thank you
date
for being here. We're gonna raid
those
somebody.
organic materials need to be in situ,
Probably
in a
lose
position
some
where they
boost.
could only have been placed there at the time the megalith was put in place. And that is very rare to find. So there's a lot of speculation and guesswork goes into the dating of
Thank you
megalithic
for being
sites.
here. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the nice words, positive
So,
words.
I want to understand more.
Code, good luck with your app, man.
Because I'm trying to remember. Did you mention that
Boost,
you
boost.
believe this lost advanced civilization was shamanistic in origin? Like,
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I believe that I believe the origin of all civilizations
okay,
is
Yeah.
shamanistic, and
Oh my god.
you know, we need to use the words advanced and the word civilization carefully.
yeah,
Because when we say advanced civilization, the natural tendency is to think of something like us. Because we think we're an advanced civilization. Although in many ways we're not an advanced civilization. We're a spiritually stunted civilization.
effectively destroying ourselves.
And we're effectively destroying ourselves. And what's advanced about that?
Right.
The fact that we can make machines and have all this clever tech and have cell phones and so on and so forth, that doesn't say that much about us, really. It doesn't speak to our qualities as being. So an advanced civilization, by definition, has to be a civilization which is not only capable of technological feats, but that is also spiritually very grounded. And it's interesting. In the tradition of Atlantis, as passed down to us by Plato, in the